This video is brought to you by volunteeraudio.com, your #1 source for all things Harley Davidson audio. From individual radios, speakers, and amps to complete plug-and-play amp and speaker systems, we've got you covered. And once you've ordered your package from Volunteer Audio, it includes lifetime tech support. And we have the very best step-by-step installation video so you can install it yourself and save money. All right, so in this particular bike, we do have lid speakers. Some of the boom systems had tour pack speakers. In that case, you're gonna follow our standard directions for replacing the rear speakers in a tour pack. Because we have these lids and we're gonna do some modification, we're gonna have to cut this plastic off to mount our adapters. We're gonna remove our lid in preparation for that. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna undo this strap. All right, so once we have that undone, we're going to undo some Velcro that's going around some wiring here. And we're going to start unplugging each one of these electrical connectors so that our lid will be able to come off. We've got one going to our locking lid actuator, and we have two going to our speaker. Our speaker is what we call a bi-amp speaker. There are two connectors going to it. Our new speaker will just have one. We'll go over that as we go back together. All right, so after you've got your electrical connections undone, your wiring's in your bag, we're gonna remove the last two screws here. They're also a T15. And we're gonna take our lid and we're gonna set it aside till we get to the point of installing our speakers. All right, so one of the first things I want you to do as you're prepping to modify your lid, we don't want to do anything to harm this lid. We don't want to have any scratches or anything put in from this improvement. So we're going to tape off all the painted surfaces on the top. Now most of our modification is going to be done from underneath, but we still want to be careful as we're flipped upside down that nothing's going to hurt it. Now I also have it laid out here on a towel just to make sure that I don't have anything that's abrasive that's touching the top of it, even after we tape it off. So I'm going to tape off around the grill because we will be removing this grill, so we're not going to tape over it. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're just creating an area to protect it here. I also want to come on the other side here and just keep this latch from opening and closing and possibly scratching something as well. I just wrap some tape around it also. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove the other two screws holding this cloth on. It's going to give us a much better view of everything we're working on underneath and get it out of our way. All right, so after you get the cloth off, we're going to take our T20. We're going to remove the 4 silver screws that are holding our grill in place. All right, so we're going to flip our lid over. We're going to remove that grill. Now, there are some little rubber inserts that go down in here that keep your grill at the right depth after you've tightened it down. So make sure you don't lose those in this process, they don't fall out, and that they go back in where they're supposed to be if they do. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the 4 screws holding the speaker in. We're not going to be using these going back together. We've got new hardware that comes in our adapter kit. All right, so we're going to set our speaker over here out of the way. All right, so next, we've got to remove this plastic, I call it a turtle shell. Kind of looks like one to me from the back side. This was to keep your belongings from touching that tiny magnet on the boom audio speaker that would overheat and possibly cause a problem. Our new speaker has an N38H rare earth magnet, neodymium. It's going to not get hot, so it's not going to cause that problem. So we no longer need this. But we also have to remove this to be able to fit that new 6x9. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to flip it back over, and I'm going to take a tool and I'm going to cut this inside edge, probably roughly a 1/4 inch under all the way around. And I'll show you that process. We'll get this removed, and then we're going to actually take another tool and sand it down smooth so that all of our parts will bolt up and seal well to keep water out of the bag. All right, so we've cut all the way around. At this point, it's not going to be perfect. This is just to get this out of our way, and then we'll do some more precision cuts as we go on. Now, as we went through, you'll see I went through these little mounting hole positions a little further. You saw smoke come out of those holes because they're going to have to be cut loose before this shell will ever come loose. We're also going to have to drop our tool down in here and cut a few of these tabs loose on the inside. And as you cut through this, it is plastic, you're making it hot, it will try to melt back together a little bit. But you should be able to grab it with a little bit of force, get it to come loose. Now if you see that you haven't cut all the way through, just flip it back over and cut through a little bit further. All right, so we've got our shell part cut off and out of our way. Now I'm going to take my tool and I'm going to cut this just a little bit closer before we start sanding. All right, so as you see, the idea is we're just sanding this outside edge till it's going to be smooth because we have a gasket that's going to go on here and we want it to seal up well. So I'm going to keep sanding here in a few minutes. I'll have it pretty well perfect. We'll come back with the adapters. We'll drill our holes and we'll get them mounted. All right, so we've got our lid sanded down. It's really smooth. We've got a great surface now for our gaskets to seal. Now you're going to end up with some adapters from us. Now depending on if you have power locks or not, this spacer, the only difference is going to be thicker or thinner. So this is the thicker one to clear these locks. It just clears this cable here, make sure that we've got our speaker will still fit and everything will be retained. Now these are not necessarily side specific. You'll notice there is a cutout though that's going to go toward that walled side. And so if you drop it in where it's going to go, you'll notice that there's also one that's cut. This is side specific for the 6x9. I'm showing this because quite often people send us pictures, oh, my lid doesn't open and close properly now. And it's because they tried to mount these on the wrong side. It moves the speaker out just enough that it drags when you open and close it. All right, so now our next step is going to be putting our hardware in place to bolt these where they go. Now, if you read the directions from American Hard Bags, and there's going to be a little QR code you can scan to do that, they're going to tell you to get a riv nut gun, to drill, and to squeeze these into this plastic. The issue with that is when you drill this, it's so thin on the edges that if I squeeze this where it expands, it ends up busting the plastic. I don't like doing that. So there's a couple ways of doing this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a drill bit that's extremely close in size to this, where it's a very tight hole, and I'm going to drill out each of the 4 factory mounting holes for that 5x7 so that these go in place. Now, I like to use a little bit of CA glue and activator to glue them in so I'm not busting the plastic. Now, we had another customer call us recently. He said, hey, I couldn't find any CA glue. Took my soldering iron after I got it in there and I heated these up just enough that the plastic melted and it grabbed the knurls on the side and that worked well. So either way would be a good way to do it. Like I say, American Hard Bag says to expand it with a riv nut gun. I haven't had good success with that. So we go this way. So I'm going to show you the way that I do it. I'll get my drill, we'll drill out these holes, we'll glue these in, and then we'll assemble our parts. All right, so now we're just going to take a drill. I've got a 7/32 bit in here. It's somewhere between that and 1/4 to make this tight. But we're going to drill the 4 holes that our original 5x7 was screwed in with. Let's screw through each one of these. And then I want you to test fit your little bushing. And now you're probably going to find out it doesn't fit yet. And you're going to have to open that hole up a little further. But we want this to be really tight. We don't want this to be a loose fit. I may even go up to the next size bit to the 1/4. All right, so that was my 1/4 bit, which is still just slightly tight. Just going to barely wallow this hole and then recheck our fitment. I can almost force that one in there. going to take a lot of pressure if you keep this hole tight enough, but there it is, pressed in. Probably would stay on its own. We're going to add a little glue to hold it. All right, so now from the back side, we've got our little bushings here stuck up, or these little inserts. I'm going to add just a couple drops of CA glue to the edge of each one, hit it with an activator so that they won't try to spin as we try to assemble this. All right, so it doesn't take much. Activator makes it dry very, very quickly. And now we are ready to assemble these parts together. All right, so in your parts, you're going to see these gaskets. We're going to make sure to put this gasket all the way around both sides of our adapters. All right, so we're going to take both sides of this gasket, or both sides of this adapter, and we're going to put this gasket material on it. Just following all the way around this edge. This is what's going to allow us to stay watertight. All right, so once our gasket's back around to where we started, we're just going to take a razor blade and cut it. And we're going to flip it over and do the other side. All right, so this is going to be enough gasket to do both sides of this. Now we're also, once these are bolted together, we're going to put another one on the outside edge of this. And that's going to be so where our speaker goes down, it's going to be sealed also. Let's get back over here to our lid. Let's start getting these put together. All right, so before we mount our adapters in place, we need to go ahead and put our grill back on. If you don't put your grill on now, you won't have access to all the screw holes. So I'm just going to pull my tape back enough. I don't have any tape under my grill anywhere. I might go ahead and remove this front one that I've put in place. All right, now again, making sure all of your little rubber grommets are still in place. When you were vacuuming up any of your debris, you may have had one of those come out. We need to make sure they're there. And we're going to take those 4 silver screws that were originally holding it in, and we're going to put them back in. Let's make sure they're all tight. There's a little tab that this grill pulls into as it comes down. We just want to make sure that it's in where it's supposed to go. Everything looks good. It's somewhat flush. I'll tighten this one a little bit more. Looks like we're good. So now we're going to take our adapters. The one with the little cut goes against this wall. Pressing it in place, it lines up on all of those nut certs that are sticking up. Drop our other part in here. I want you to hand start each one of these screws, making sure that they do not cross thread. It's aluminum, so if they do cross thread, they're really difficult to repair. If you go screwing it in, it stops. Do not force it. Back it back out. Get it lined up correctly. When it's right, it'll go in very, very easily. Once I get them all started, I want to bring it down to the point that I'm just barely compressing those gaskets. Then we'll work around tightening them all up. This is plastic. We don't want to over tighten it because we definitely don't want to risk breaking anything. We're going to do this by hand. If you use a drill, you are going to over tighten it. But we're just pulling down and we see all these gaskets are compressed. All right, so this part, you've pretty well got it licked. This was the hard part. Now we're going to put our gasket on the outside edge. We're going to bolt our 6x9 in. Then we're going to go back to the bike, get all of our harnessing where it goes. Get our lid on, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now we're going to take our Hertz speaker. We're going to mount it. I want you to put your terminals toward the middle of the bag. I'm just going to line it up over the 4 holes. Now, I normally use my own screws. It does come with some stainless screws, but I like these kind of flat wafer screws a little better. If they look different, it's because they are slightly. These are just some short screws I like. It's got the little flatter, almost washer built in. So as we tighten these down, we're compressing the gaskets between the speaker and the adapter, and they fit great. And this is going to keep us from having any water get in our bags. That's the big concern with any lid, any cutting kit, any adapter, is that you properly gasket it. So many times you'll hear about people having leaks, but normally it's because of their install. It's because they didn't use the right parts, they didn't use the right gaskets, and then they have a leak and they want to blame the fact that it was done, but really it was the fact that it was done wrong. So I'm going to untape my bag. I've got one more modification to do that I do to the strap. That little cloth part that goes across has a little metal bar in it. I'm going to cut it down. I'll show you that. And then we'll go back together and put it back on our bike. All right, so you'll notice when you go to put this cloth back on that this metal is going to hit your speaker. Now you could just bend it up, and a lot of times people do that. But what I like doing is sliding that piece of metal out, and I'll come right to the side of this hole and I'll just cut it so that I have a shorter piece of metal. All right, so all we did was we just shortened this down just to make sure that it's going to fit in here now without trying to get in the way of that speaker. I'll let that cool for a second, and then we'll go back together with it. All right, so now we're going to take our metal insert, put our screws back through them, let's tighten them back down in here where they go. And when you open your bag, the Harley Davidson logo should be facing at you where you can read the logo without it being upside down. So making sure you put it back in the same orientation that it was factory. All right, so that's in here. We can pull this back, we can get everything plugged in and secured, and then the last step, putting that back on the bike. So I'll get it untaped. We're going to go over to the bike. I want to show you how to take the boom amplifier out next, how to plug in your amp bypass connector, and we'll do that while the lid is off so I can show you where you can see it a little bit easier. All right, so when you have a Boom 2 system, you're going to have an amplifier, 1 amp for every 2 speakers. If this was a 6-speaker bike, we would have an amp in both rear bags. This being a 4-speaker, the left rear bag has got this cover, and underneath it, you're going to find this amplifier. So what we normally are going to do is we're going to unplug the amplifier connector. We're going to get our Allen head tool. We're going to take these 2 Allen heads out. We're going to remove the amplifier. And in your kit from Volunteer Audio is going to be a connector that says rear amp bypass. This is the correct one to do an amp that's in your tour pack or an amp in the left rear bag. There'll be another one. The other one is going to actually say right amp bypass. That goes in the right bag, and you'll only have that amp if you have front lower speakers. Now, if you have front lowers, you're going to want to watch our video on either liquid-cooled lower adapters if you're adding them and you don't have them already, or if you do have the factory lowers, we're going to send out new harnessing that plugs in the fairing that runs down to those lowers. You cannot reuse the factory wiring for the lowers and keep them on the correct end of the amplifier. They're actually ran off the rear channels. We want them run off the front. So you're going to take this one that says rear amp bypass. We're going to plug it in here. By plugging in that one connector, our rear wiring is now connected from the rear of our amplifier to our rear speakers. It's really just that simple. We're going to go ahead and take the amp out for a little bit of weight savings. But again, if you have the other amp in the right bag, you're going to plug in the right amp bypass. I'll show you the front when we get up into the fairing and how easy that is to do as well. All right, so once your amp is out, we're just going to put our wiring back in as if it was there. We're going to bring our cover back over top here. We're just going to snap it back in. Just this little push clip. Making sure that we take our original wiring and it's back in the holders that it was in from the factory. So it's going to look just like it did before, but now you don't have the weight of the amp in the bag. There's no need to leave it in there. All right, let's move on to putting our lid back on with our new 6x9. All right, same order that we took it apart in. We're just going to start the 2 middle screws here on our bag first. There's 4 total. Actually, normally I get these started. Normally I go ahead and put the outside ones in without the cloth and then tighten them all down. I want you to go ahead and start the outside ones. There's no need in tightening those because we're going to take them back out. We just want to make sure our bracket is lined up in the right place so we can tighten those 2 middle ones all the way down. All right, so now I'll tighten the 2 middle ones. All right, now I'm going to remove those outside ones. That's going to go back through this cloth once we have our wiring done. All right, so I want to show you this connector. This is our rear speaker connector. We're going to have a wire that is striped and a wire that is solid. Now green goes on the left. It really doesn't matter. Either side is going to work. Either side is going to plug in because you're going to be in that bag. But make sure that your striped wire is on your negative for now. Always at the end we want to do a polarity test and make sure that we're correct in everywhere these wires are. But for now, this is where it's going to go. We're going to take our factory connector. This particular one here is going to plug right in to that. We're no longer going to be using this connector. This went to the second connection on your speaker factory. It is not needed now in our install and is not powered up. All right, so next we're going to do a little bit of wire management in the bag. We're going to take some zip ties. We're just going to feed them down underneath the edge, come up through this little plastic webbing that's between our lid and this latch mechanism. Do this so nothing is just rattling around in the bag. Nothing is in here loose. So after you got that done, you just want to cut those zip ties with a zip tie cutter. All right, now there is this Velcro area on the back side of your cloth retainer here. We're going to wrap it around this cord here. Go back together. Now we're going to start our outside screws. Now these are going to be the fine machine screws. These are not going to be the coarse threaded screws. The coarse threaded are on this end. All right. So just like that, we have successfully modified your 5x7s to a 6x9. If you got to this part, you are past the hardest part of the install. It's a little tedious, a little time consuming. I don't want to necessarily say it's hard. It's just something you got to be focused on. You got to do a good job of. But our speakers are now connected. Our amp has been bypassed. Our mounts are in place. And we now have 6x9s in our lids. So we're going to do the other bag, and then we're going to move to the front. So we'll get that done off film. No need in showing you the exact same process a second time. I think you understand the process now. And we'll catch back up in the fairing here shortly.